in spending.
Let's look at the calendar, which you have just talked about, because the continuing resolution does run out. The resolution funding the government runs out on March 4th. By the end of March, we may reach the debt ceiling of $14 trillion. How do you plan to do this? Because to a certain degree, they both involve the same thing, which is that in return for these things, continue funding the government and to raise the debt limit, you want funding cuts, spending cuts. Are you going to deal with them both at the same time? Are you going to deal with them separately? How do you see that playing out?
We expect to deal with these as separate questions. I think these are two opportunities that Congress has to deal with the administration to cut spending. And if the administration's been listening, as we have, to the American people, I would expect they will join us in reducing spending here in Washington, D.C.
But how do you resolve your differences with the president? These are two very important issues here. One is you could run out of money for the government. The other is that we might default on our full faith and credit. How do you resolve your differences with the president where he wants a freeze and you want sharp cuts in spending?
The American people will not tolerate our increasing the debt limit without serious reductions in spending. And they're not going to allow us to move ahead if we don't put real budget controls in place so that this can't happen again. It's time for us to get serious. The American people on Election Day made it clear they want us to cut spending and they want us to create jobs. And what we have done is the cutting spending will, in fact, help create jobs in America.
So are you saying basically you want unconditional surrender from the White House?
We want to reduce spending.
And
period.
And there's no compromise?
We want to reduce spending. I hope that's what the American people want. I hope the president and his advisors are listening to the American people.
I mean, there's an implied or else in all of this. Because if you're not willing to compromise... Let me finish the question, Mr. Speaker. If you're not willing to compromise, then the government could shut down. If you're not willing to compromise, and I'm not saying it's your fault or the president's, but we could default on our debt.
Well, we have to work our will in the House. We have to work with our colleagues in the Senate and put something on the president's desk. But I'm going to suggest to you that we're going to keep our word to the American people, that we will, in fact, reduce wasteful Washington spending.
I want to... I know you're not threatening to default, but do you agree with administration officials and other economists that defaulting on the full faith and credit of the United States would be a financial disaster?
That would be a financial disaster not only for our country, but for the worldwide economy. So remember, the American people on Election Day said we want to cut spending and we want to create jobs. And you can't create jobs if you default on the federal debt. Listen, there's been a spending spree going on in Washington these last couple of years that's beyond control. And if the president's going to ask us to increase the debt limit, then he's going to have to be willing to cut up the credit cards. We've got to work together by listening to the American people and reducing these obligations that we have.
So defaulting on the full faith and credit is unacceptable to you?
I don't think it's a question that's even on the table.
You mentioned earlier that if you cut spending, that will increase. There are a lot of economists, including some conservatives, who say, yes, in the long term, we absolutely have to deal with the debt, but that in the short term, to have the kind of cuts you have will actually cost jobs and could conceivably endanger the recovery.
No, I've got 200 economists who say otherwise. And the fact is this, is that by running up the spending money we don't have, running up these huge budget deficits, we create more uncertainty in the private sector. And this is where cutting spending will create jobs because it's going to bring greater fiscal responsibility here in Washington, D.C., and some of the uncertainty and allow jobs to be created in America.